Good morning. My name is John Scott. I'm the Vice President of Sales for the Automation Group in the Americas, and I will be stepping us through a discussion this morning of process automation with a particular focus on the vessel operation. I see from the chat that we have participants from around the globe, so welcome. If you didn't join us the first time around, let's cover a couple housekeeping items. You have the ability throughout the presentation to engage in the chat at any time. One of my colleagues will likely chime in and answer any questions you may have as we're going through the presentation. And then towards the end, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers, and I'll be able to respond specifically to your questions. So, a little background on myself. I've been involved with process automation solutions since very early on, 2002 or 3 with APL and SSA in LA Long Beach, and I've worked on a number of projects since then. So as we go through the presentation today, I'll take time to try and talk in a little bit more detail about those experiences. And then we do also have a couple case study slides at the end to go into a little bit greater detail on current customers as well as customers that are currently deploying. So let's go ahead and get started. So this slide caught my attention. Mr. Christensen spoke at the Global Liner Shipping Conference. I saw his quote, and I thought it was very relevant to this morning's discussion. He spoke about the growing container volumes and specifically about the need for an increased reliability and efficiency in order for terminal operators to keep up with the growing volumes. So, as we go through the presentation today, if you just think about your own operation and specifically about the process of getting information into the terminal operating system so that your terminal operating system can do its job, plan moves most efficiently, and keep track of the movement of the containers or cargo from the vessel and ultimately out the gate. I think you'll discover as you think about this today that for most terminal operators, it's largely a manual process. And so when we talk about process automation, we're talking about the ability to use technology to move that information automatically into the terminal operating system. The challenge with a manual process is that it creates an enormous reliability on labor, and the quality of that labor is inconsistent. You may have a great operation one day, and then the next day you suffer because you've got a casual workforce or you've got someone that's not as familiar with your terminal. And from an efficiency standpoint, if it's manual, the entire process moves at the speed of that manual data input. And if it's not a consistent and efficient speed, then your entire operation suffers. And so what we'll be talking about today is the benefit of having that information move in an automated fashion that's predictable and in concert with the real-time operation of your equipment. Second thing on the slide I want you to look at is the dramatic growth in the size of the containers over the last 10, 15 years. And if you look at your own operation, I suspect you'll also see a huge spike in the volume of business that needs to be handled in a short period of time. So where before you may have received 2 or 3 vessels over the course of a week, now it may be just one very large vessel. And the expectation is that that vessel is turned quickly. There's no value to the owner while it sits there at the terminal. So this creates even greater strain on the terminal operator to put more equipment into service, to put more people in the terminal, and create safety issues, and it also decreases the efficiency of the operation. The second thing to think about is the competitive landscape. If we look at the 20-year period leading up to 2010, there were 9 automated terminals that were deployed in that period. If we look now at the last 3 years, there are 12 automated terminals that are either deployed or in the process of deploying. You got in the Americas, you have Global Container Terminal in New Jersey, and right in the LA Basin, you have TradePac and LBCT. So the competitive landscape is changing, and it will be significantly more competitive. And so for the terminals that are not fully automated, which is the bulk of those terminals, process automation is the means by which you can gain the reliability and the efficiency that you need in order to compete with the fully automated terminals. Now, when we talked at the last webinar, we talked about the difficulty of seeing process automation. You look out the window, you see cranes, you see equipment, you don't see process automation. And the same can be said of our own organization. And so I've put this slide together to emphasize where the Kalmar SmartPort solution fits into the big picture. Most everyone's familiar with Navis and the terminal operating system Sparks and N4. Broma is certainly very well known. Spreaders are deployed on most lifting equipment. And then within the automated equipment space, the automated stacking cranes, the AutoStrads, the auto shuttles, Kalmar's brand is well known. So less well known has been the process automation, and over the last few years, Kalmar has pulled together offerings that were provided in-house, offerings that came from Navis, and offerings that came from a company called WareNet. And all of these offerings now are united under the Kalmar SmartPort brand, and we'll be talking about 5 of those 11 different modules as we go through the presentation today. The technology comes not only from the internal Kalmar brands, Navis, Broma, but also from third-party vendors that are part of our SmartPort Alliance. So we have partnered with APS that provides the OCR technology that we'll be talking about today, with Simeo that provides the tracking technology we'll be talking about for GPS and LPR, and with Zebra that provides the RTLS tracking and RFID technology that we'll talk about. Another vendor, Cross Control, is able to provide screens and integrated work instruction through SmartPort. So as we go through the presentation today, this is a really important point. If I look at the early projects that I was involved with APL, with APMT, with SSA, each of those terminal operators had to do all of their own research, put together a collection of vendors, put together the integration. It was a lot of work. And what the Kalmar SmartPort Alliance offers is the ability now for a new customer, like for example APMT Elizabeth in New Jersey, to have a single point of contact, Kalmar, to deploy the entire system that we're going to talk about today. So single point of contact, known integration, and a project that is able to run much more quickly and much more smoothly than prior to the SmartPort Alliance. So today's focus, we're going to look first at SmartKey. We'll talk a little bit about SmartLift and SmartStack, and we'll spend some time with the SmartPath application and the SmartFleet application. These are 5 of the 9 modules that are part of the Kalmar SmartPort suite. So first, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the process as it exists today, the manual process as it exists today, versus the process after the technology that we'll talk about today has been deployed. So let's start at the vessel. At the vessel, for most terminals that are manual, 2 things need to happen. First, the container that's being removed from the vessel, that container needs to be identified, and that information needs to be confirmed into the terminal operating system. Second, the equipment that container is delivered to needs to receive a work instruction. Whether it's a terminal tractor or a strad, it needs to have an instruction on where the terminal operating system has determined is the most efficient place for that container to go in the terminal. So, in a truly manual environment, that might be a list of containers that's printed out in advance and radio, instructions to the terminal tractor or the strad. For terminals that have a little bit more sophistication in their terminal operating system, they may use a software module like Hatch Clerk in order to have a person automatically type in the container ID and type in the terminal tractor ID, and then the terminal operating system can calculate and dispatch the work instruction to a screen in the truck. So a little bit better than paper and radio, but still a process that's completely reliant upon the person that's entering the container ID and entering the terminal tractor ID. And the speed at which they make that data entry is the speed at which your operation will proceed. So if we can automate that process, then we're no longer reliant on a person to enter that data. And the speed of the operation is the speed that the crane can operate at. It's not in any way encumbered by the speed of the person entering the data. So if you look at the section just below where we have the pictures and the automation description there, the two technologies we'll talk about when we talk about SmartQuay and SmartPath are the ability for us to automatically identify the container using OCR and to automatically match that container to the terminal tractor, and then to track that terminal tractor throughout its work instruction process. So no human intervention required in order to automate this process. So that's the first step at the vessel. The second step is in the yard. So the terminal tractor is going to proceed to their point of work that they've been instructed to in the yard. And today, in a manual process, if the terminal operating system is trying to use any type of algorithms or automation around which point of work would be most efficient to direct a tractor to, typically the location of that tractor is known based upon an operator hitting a function key when they arrive at the berth or when they arrive at a point of work in the yard. And if the operator doesn't hit that function key, then once again, the terminal operating system doesn't have good information and the efficiency of the work instruction is compromised. The second step is for the lifting equipment, whether it be a top loader or an RTG, to identify the UTR or STRAD, UTR, and then to select the job that's most appropriate or that corresponds to that terminal tractor. And again, all this is feeding the terminal operating system, and the accuracy of the terminal operating system is dependent upon an assumption that the job that is performed corresponds with the work instruction that was selected. So if the wrong work instruction is selected, or if a different container is lifted, then the accuracy of the information in the terminal operating system is compromised. So what do we do here? So the automation in this area, we use a tracking technology, either RTLS or GPS or LPR, depending on the requirements of the terminal, in order to track the lifting equipment. We also monitor sensors on the lifting equipment in order to determine when the lock and the unlock occurs and when the lift occurs, and to automate the handoff between the terminal tractor and the lifting equipment. The next step is, from an inventory standpoint, where does that container end up in the stack? So in today's environment, a manual environment, you either rely on a clerk to manually update the inventory after the vessel discharge operation, or if you're providing work instructions and the opportunity for the operator or a clerk to confirm a work instruction, then that is the work instruction will drive the location information or inventory information for the container in the terminal. Now, the challenge with that is that if the container is actually placed at a different position in the stack, that won't be captured without automation, and the inventory becomes wrong. So the technology we'll be talking about, SmartStack, uses tracking information and sensor information in order to ensure that the terminal operating system is updated with what actually happens. So just to summarize, across the top, I suspect some of those squares with X's through them you'll recognize as processes that exist in your operation today. And the technology we'll be talking about now will describe in greater detail how to eliminate those manual processes. So let's talk about SmartQuay. So the first step in SmartQuay is to identify the container. And for that, we work with OCR, our partner APS. If you look at the sill beam in the picture just above where it says hard hat area, you'll see 3 cameras. So those cameras are used to take a picture of the container, and then an algorithm is used to convert that picture into the corresponding numbers that identify the container. That's the first step. The second step, SmartQuay, is tracking the spreader. So we're receiving information from the OCR vendor, from APS, and from the PLC on the crane that allows us to understand the trolley and hoist position of that spreader. We are also tracking the UTR, so we understand where that terminal tractor is, and we can use that information in order to automatically match the container to the terminal tractor. Recently, we've also adopted a technology that is patented by APS. It's referred to as Matchmaker. And if you look at the terminal tractor, you'll see a barcode on the roof of the terminal tractor. That information can be used to supplement SmartQuay or even as a primary to drive the handoff. And the advantage here is it also provides a backup so that if the algorithm or the handoff fails, there's still an image for an exception clerk to look at and to remotely fix any exceptions to the process. So you have a fully automated process that also includes automated exception handling that can be done remotely. The second step in the process, SmartLift. So as the terminal tractor proceeds into the terminal to either an RTG or to a top loader, the challenge for that operator is to identify the tractor that's beneath them, and then in a manual operation to scroll through the list and find the work instruction that corresponds to that tractor. They also, of course, need to verify that the tractor's in the right place and that that work instruction can be performed. So this takes time, and it slows down the operation, and it's not efficient for the operator. So what we do is we use automation in order to track the tractor and to track the RTG. So we're able to understand when those two pieces of equipment are in proximity to each other and to automatically promote the work instruction for that terminal, for that operator. And it makes the RTG operator or the top handler operator's job more efficient and more timely. The second thing that's important is in a manual operation today, if the operator or the clerk is manually selecting the job, the accuracy is dependent upon how accurate that person is. If they select the wrong job or if they work a different job, then again, we end up with poor information in the terminal operating system. So SmartLift addresses both an increase in the speed of the operation as well as an increase in the reliability and accuracy of the data. So next step, SmartStack. So we've identified the container at the vessel. We've moved it automatically into the terminal and transitioned it to a piece of lifting equipment. And now that lifting equipment is going to place the container in the stack. And for a load back operation would be pulling a container from the stack and delivering it. Regardless, the put or pull of that container into the stack in a manual operation, the location of that container in the stack is driven by the work instruction or driven by a manual entry into the terminal operating system of that container's location. SmartStack eliminates the need for that. So by tracking the RTG or the top handler, and specifically the spreader of the RTG or the top handler, we're able to determine exactly where the container was put or pulled from in the stack. And that allows us to update the terminal operating system with what actually happened, regardless of whether the work instruction was followed or not. Two more modules I'll cover, and then we're going to take a look at some software that allows you to visualize and see everything that we're covering in the presentation. So SmartPath. Today, if you are a user of Sparks 3.7 or of N4, you'll have familiarity with a product called PrimeRoute. So what PrimeRoute does is PrimeRoute looks at a pool of terminal tractors or a pool of strads, and it seeks to minimize the unladen travel time of that equipment. So ideally, it will match a job from the vessel with a job back to the vessel, and it'll choose the equipment that can most efficiently perform that job. Now that, of course, requires that the terminal operating system knows where the terminal tractor is located or where the strad is located. And in a manual operation, in order to do that, it relies upon the operator hitting a function key when they reach a specific point in the terminal. So if they're directed to the berth, when they reach the berth, they're expected to hit a function key. If they're directed to a point of work in the yard, the same is true. The challenge is that if the operator hits the function key prior to actually arriving, then we have problems with sequence. The terminal operating system will think that tractor A is ahead of tractor B because tractor A hit the function key first, even though in reality that may not be the case. Tractor B may be in front. So this causes a lot of problems. So one of the benefits of SmartPath is the ability for real-time location information to be updated to the terminal operating system so that Prime Route can do its job properly with good location accuracy on the Strat or the terminal tractor. SmartFleet. So a lot of the technology we've just talked about has been focused upon understanding, spreader position, understanding the location of the equipment for the purpose of automating the handoff between the equipment or the tracking of the container in and out of the stack. That equipment puts in place the infrastructure for us to pay attention to other sensors on the equipment. So by looking at the PLC and the sensors that are available on that CAN bus, we can pay attention to other valuable information. So if you look at the slide, what you're seeing here is a dashboard for each piece of equipment. If you look in the middle towards the top, you'll see a yellow fuel icon, and that denotes that that particular terminal tractor is low on fuel. To the left of that, you'll see a red alarm. It's an engine fault code. So there may be an issue with that tractor, and by proactively alerting the maintenance team to it, that tractor can be pulled from service before damage is done to the tractor. You'll also see some yellow and red wrenches. Those denote preventative maintenance that needs to occur or is overdue. And again, the system can look at engine hours, can look at a number of different parameters in order to determine when maintenance should occur. So bottom line, it makes it a lot easier for your maintenance team to maintain the equipment, and it helps to ensure that you don't have equipment that's damaged because it wasn't pulled from service when it should have been. So I'm going to pass this over now to my colleague, and we will provide a demonstration of SmartMap, which is the visualization tool for what we've talked about here.
Thank you. As mentioned, I'm Barry Gollings, sales engineer for Cargotec Kalmar, and I will be stepping through just a brief overview of the SmartMap application. What you see on the screen now is a very zoomed out view of a particular terminal in Long Beach, California. This is an RFID terminal where we have outfitted all of the internal CHE and street trucks with RFID. From a map perspective, we have some of the basic user functionality. Say zoom, for example. I can zoom into a particular machine or part of the yard. I can pan and move around. I can zoom back out. Another interesting feature is the traffic pattern history of these assets as they move throughout the facility. In the upper right-hand corner, I can select the snail trail history. And what this will give is an idea of the traffic internal versus external. So the bright magenta color here are the street trucks that are entering the facility and where they are going once on site. The black lines, the black trails, are the internal trucks. This can give folks an idea as to what the congestion issues are, where in the yard they're having traffic problems, things of that nature. I can also look at individual assets and their traffic patterns. So what I'll queue up is an actual terminal truck, and the H113 is what we've got selected here in the middle right-hand side of the screen. If I hit the trace button, that'll give us an idea of what this truck did during this shift. Started down here what looks to be the parking lot, and then looks to be working vessel operations, as this up here at the top is the berth area. We have alerts that we can set up that will automatically trigger if a particular truck goes in an area of the yard it's not supposed to. So in addition to seeing visually on the map where things are in real time, we can also automate the alerts if an asset goes into an area that the terminal does not want it to be in. So let's look at a particular street truck visit. I've selected a street truck, and again, I'm going to hit the trace feature. And this is in replay mode, so I have the ability to press play and pause, and I can speed up in the lower left-hand corner here the manner in which it's played back. And this gives an idea of where this truck goes after it came through the end gates. And rather than watch the entire truck visit, I'll speed up to where the actual truck exited the facility. So the end gates are here. You can see where the truck came up through and down this row here to be serviced by one of the RTGs, and then exited the facility ultimately here at the out gates. So let's take a look at the RTG grid and what's happening there. I've got RTG 27 selected here. We'll zoom in a little bit. And when you zoom into a certain level, you'll automatically get the license plate IDs populated for the street trucks as they're in queue here, waiting to be serviced by the RTGs. In the lower right-hand column or right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the transition history for this particular machine. So you've got a container ID from where to where. So in this example that's highlighted, there's a container ID, there's a from, which is a position in the stack, that's a row base cell tier, to the RTG, which means the RTG pulled the container from the stack. And in the next row, you see where the RTG actually handed the container off to the street truck. That's essentially just a brief overview of the RFID site. What I can also show is our GPS site, and we'll show the top handler and terminal truck handoff. So other than RFID, this site actually has DGPS on the top handlers and regular GPS on the terminal trucks. Again, this is in playback mode. You can see the truck pull into position. If I pause it right here, we can see that the terminal truck is in position. The top handler's spreader is narrow. It's working a 20-foot container. And the top handler is positioned over the back of the truck, which would indicate it's pulling a rear 20. And as I hit play again, this spreader will go from clear to a solid color, which that gives us the indication that the pull from truck actually occurred. Pulls the container, the terminal truck will drive off, and the top handler will continue into the stack to place the container in the stack. So let's take a look at the same scenario, but the handoff will be between terminal truck and RTG. Truck will pull into position, and the exchange will take place between the terminal truck and the RTG. And when that exchange has taken place, the terminal truck will drive off. So that's essentially just a brief overview. Given the time constraints of the webinar series, that's all I'm allowed to show at this point. Certainly there is a lot more to show with the SmartMap application, and I would encourage you to reach out to your sales team if you're interested in seeing more detail, and perhaps even request detail for operations that maybe suit your facility and how your facility operates. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. As Robert mentioned, this video will be available next week for download and replay, as well as this entire seminar. So let's talk a little bit about where this technology is deployed, and I'll also answer. I saw there were a few questions in the chat session about the tracking technology that was used. So for many of the terminals in the LA Long Beach area, the RTLS, the wear tag technology is used for tracking the bulk of the equipment. It's certainly the technology that's used for tracking the street trucks throughout. That tracking occurs not only in the LA Basin, but also in Seattle and Oakland, and we'll be going live in New Jersey July 5th. And I was just in Colombia last week, and Cartagena also using the same technology, the RTLS technology, to track the street truck. Within the terminal, it really depends upon the site that we're talking about, whether we're using RTLS, GPS, or even LPR to track the equipment. So let me walk you through a few sites that are currently deploying, and then we'll also take a more careful look at LA Long Beach and the technologies that are deployed there. So first, TTI Long Beach in LA, in Long Beach, they're in the process of replacing a system they deployed earlier. We are installing the Simeo differential GPS on the top handlers, and we are installing the cross-control GPS on all of the terminal tractors. The process automation that we talked about, the SmartQuay, the SmartLift, the SmartStack, and also from the gate, the Smart Truck. Each of these applications will go live at TTI Long Beach this year. APMT Elizabeth is going through a similar deployment right now. It's paralleling the Port of New York, New Jersey's requirement for street truck tagging, which will go into effect July 5th. At that point, just like the rest of the West Coast terminals, the street truck will need an RFID tag in order to enter the terminal. And the tracking that you saw Barry doing in the demonstration of the external trucks, the pink lines, that is based upon that terminal tractor tag. Sorry, street truck tag. London Gateway is in the process of deploying SmartStack. APMT Aarhus, SmartFleet. SPRC Columbia has just completed their deployment of the street truck tracking. They also use the Smart Rail application and the SmartFleet application. Santos Brazil is deploying SmartQuay on 13 of their key cranes this year. Malta Freeport, if you were with us for the last webinar, you saw the SmartPath deployment that they just completed there. And Northport, Malaysia is in the process of deploying SmartFleet on their terminal tractor fleet. So, overview of projects that are currently ongoing or recently deployed. There are also in the LA Long Beach Basin a number of projects that have deployed over the course of the last 10 years. And so I've provided this slide in order to give you an overview of what technology is deployed where. So I'll talk about SmartQuay. I saw Chris Sharp was online. One of the first terminals to deploy this technology in the LA Basin was SSA. And the SmartQuay software, as we talked about today, uses OCR in order to automatically identify the container, and then uses the SmartQuay software in order to match the handoff to the terminal tractor. So that technology is deployed and in use and has been for years at 9 of the terminals in the LA Basin. And those are all denoted with a little red asterisk, a little red line next to the name of the terminal operator. The next thing we talked about was SmartLift. and you'll see the little green line that denotes those terminals that use SmartLift in order to automate the handoff between the terminal tractor. There are no strads in LA Long Beach, so between the terminal tractor and the top loader. The next thing we talked about was SmartStack, and each of the terminals there with the little blue hash to the left, they use SmartStack in order to automate the final position of the container into or out of the stack. And then if we talk a little bit about not the vessel, but rather the gate side of the operation, all 13 terminals use smart lanes in order to validate that the street truck has a tag, and that tag is required by the Port Authority for the purpose of monitoring compliance with the California Air Resources Board emissions requirements, and also with the Port Authority of both LA and Long Beach. They each have a program, a truck registration program that's required, and it also validates the compliance with that program. Once the truck enters the terminal, the RFID tag is placed into a beacon mode, and it transmits its location information every 5 seconds. And that is what produces the detailed snail trails that you saw in Barry's demo for the street truck. And 12 out of the 13 terminals in LA Long Beach use that system in order to track the street truck within the terminal. Okay, let's shift, I guess, a little bit here from our discussion of technology and talk a little bit about some of the people. So, the technology we've talked about today, it works with any terminal operating system. In LA Long Beach, 4 of the terminals use either have a software Sparks or N4. The other 9 don't. They use other terminal operating systems. So the system is able to work with any terminal operating system. It's also able to work with any equipment, whether it's Kalmar brand or Fantuzzi or pick a name. We've deployed on many types of equipment. So the experience that our people have gained through these deployments over the last 10 years is very important. It's what allows us to work with any terminal operating system or to work with any piece of equipment. And it's a very important component of the solution. You also see this experience within our support organization. So some of the individuals in our support organization, Robert, Constantine, Kenneth, they come from suppliers of this technology originally, and they've been involved in a number of these deployments. They've been to the training with Simeo, they've been to the training with APS. They're able to provide a first level of support for the total solution. So the terminal operator is not challenged with having to try to figure out, if I have a problem, is it an OCR problem? Is it an RFID problem? GPS problem? Interface problem? It's a long list. And this team does a fantastic job of providing support and identifying what the problem is, and has the ability to remote into the site and fix the problem. Now, each time a customer opens a case, they have the ability when they close the case to rate us. And what you see here, the CSAT score of 4.9, this is the score this group received in the 4th quarter of last year. So they do a great job, and it's recognized and appreciated by the customers. Now, the last slide before we talk about this, I'd like to take a break and answer questions that any remaining questions that you may have. So go ahead, type your questions, and we'll take it from there. So Daniel's question about interacting with other terminal operating systems. Yes, so in the case of LA Long Beach, 13 different terminal operators, 9 of those terminal operators use a TOS that is not N4 or Sparks, and we interface with those terminal operating systems. So certainly no limit as to our ability to interface with other terminal operating systems. So a couple questions here. So workforce management. So all of the data that is captured by the system is available to export to a third-party system. We only have one customer, SPRC, in Cartagena, that is actually tagging personnel and tracking personnel. Um, in terms of operator logon, that's another option at the equipment level. And this information, yes, could be passed to a third-party workforce management system. We do not currently have a partner as part of the SmartPort Alliance. That's something that's been talked about and maybe added in the future. Looks like Barry has a question. Will it support the needs of my operational processes? So we've worked with terminal operators, both those that operate a strad operation as well as a terminal tractor operation and a wheeled operation. So we've seen a number of different operations across the now 30 plus sites that we're deployed at. So I suspect that yes, we could work with your operation and certainly be willing to sit down and map the process of your operation, just like you saw today in the demonstration for more generically for the SmartQuay application. Do you have to develop a middleware? That's a good question. So the middleware, I would almost think of the SmartPort software as the middleware. So what it is doing is aggregating location information, sensor information, and RFID information, and it's using that information in order to track events. And what's published to the terminal operating system is the event. So where previously a person may have typed in a container ID, now the SmartPort application will send that container ID directly to the terminal operating system. So one of the reasons that we can interface with most any third-party TOS is we're using SmartPort as the middleware to pass just the information that the terminal operating system is capable of consuming. So we don't pass lat-long information. We don't pass spreader height information to a terminal operating system. We just pass the event information that terminal operating system is capable of consuming. Question about terminal that's implemented all of our process automation options. All no. So Smart Rail, for example, this is auto steer on the RTGs. There's very few sites in North America that have implemented that. A number of sites in South America. If we look at Smart Truck, more broadly deployed in North America than in South America. So I think each of the applications, with the exception of Smart Track, has been deployed and is live at a customer site, but not any one customer has every application deployed. Elvis has got a question about cost. So, if you look at a smart lanes type application, focused on RFID, identifying the terminal, the street truck, you're in a probably 50 to 100K range. If you look at some of the more automated processes like SmartQuay, you're probably approaching a $1 to $2 million investment depending upon the size of your terminal. I think the important thing here is that for most operators, the return on investment is in months, and the worst case, it might be a year. So the payback period is significant, and I think that's the more important component to consider. Daniel's got a question about XML-RDT. So yes, if you're a Sparks 3.7 customer, we are using XML-RDT to exchange data between the SmartPort applications and Sparks 3.7, and you do need to have a license for XML-RDT as part of the deployment. Question about the best sequence approach for a terminal with no TOS. That haven't heard that one before. I mean, certainly you could use the SmartMap as a visualization tool for your operation to understand where the equipment is in the terminal, but it's really the job of the terminal operating system to understand the optimum location for the container in the terminal and to um, you know to plan how the containers will be staged in the terminal. That's not a function of SmartPort. Looks like I missed a question. I'm looking back up the list. So, do we work with any other OCR vendors? So, yes, we've worked with SAIC at the SSA terminals. We're working with High Tech Solutions at TTI. So, the system can certainly support any OCR vendor. But I think it's important to understand, the relationship that we have with APS and the relationship we have with this other Smart Alliance partners. It goes beyond just integration. It allows a customer to have a single point of contact, Calmar, for the purchase process, for the implementation process, and most importantly, for the support process. So, I think that's the value of the SmartPort Alliance. From a technical integration standpoint, certainly we can work with anyone, but from an ease of implementation and support, certainly the SmartPort Alliance helps to put a process in place to make that easier for the terminal operator. Daniel's got another question. So the RFID technology that we use for the street truck, for most terminal operators, the only exception being Cartagena, SPRC, the tag is permanently attached to the driver's side mirror of the truck. There certainly is an option to use a temporary tag. That temporary tag can either be hung from the driver's side window or magnetically attached to the truck, and it will provide the same function as the permanently attached tag. Elvis had a question about the total package. So certainly the entire process can be managed from start to finish by Calmar. It's more typical that Calmar is responsible for the management of the individual vendors and that the terminal operator still has a project manager for interaction between the terminal's IT group, the terminal's operations group, and to the extent that the wireless LAN is provided by the terminal operator, they may be part of that as well. The installation on the equipment, if that's handled by the terminal's mechanics, then they may manage that aspect of the project as well. So it's really up to the terminal operator, in terms of how much of the project they want Calmar to manage. Prescription of standard suite of technologies. That's a good question. So I think yes. So if we break it down, so if we look at a terminal track, if we look at a street truck, um, we've used consistently the RTLS wear tag. The reason for that is it provides extremely accurate locate information inside the terminal, and that's a pretty definitive component. In terms of the lifting equipment, the use of either differential GPS certainly allows us to streamline the deployment. In the cases where we need to provide accurate location under a key crane or in areas that are heavily shadowed by GPS, then we'll typically use a technology like LPR. So if you're a strat operation, for example, and trying to locate to a lane underneath a key crane, we would use LPR. So generally speaking, we'll work with the terminal operator and look at the challenge their environment presents and then pick the technology that's appropriate. Looks like we've made some progress on the questions. Why don't we take one or two more, and then we'll I'm certainly available one-on-one at any time. So in order to interact with RTGs, do we need anything special? So in general, we interface with the PLC on the RTG, and that allows us to pull the trolley and hoist position, as well as the 2040 position of the spreader. In the case of some very old RTGs that don't have a PLC, we will interface directly with sensors, and in the case of some, we've actually added sensors. So generally speaking, we can get any piece of equipment to work. There's a system design process that we go through with each piece of equipment in order to determine how to get the information we need. First step to see if process automation would provide value to my operation. I think for most terminal operators, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of where to start. If you operate a container terminal and you don't have your process automated, you're losing money. And so it's a matter of looking at where you're losing the most money and targeting those solutions first. So for some customers, that may be the key. For other customers, it may be the gate. It really depends on that customer's specific labor and operational requirements. So I'm going to go ahead and just go back to our last slide, and just a couple points that that I want to wrap up with and make sure that everyone sort of takes home as food for thought. So as we've talked about, the process automation solutions, in the last presentation we talked a little bit more about safety than we did in this presentation. But in general, if you look at your operation today and you look at the manual processes that are required to update the terminal operating system, it first of all makes your operation dependent upon the speed of the person and the ability of that person to accurately enter the data. And that's not an efficient process. It also typically places people in harm's way that are entering that information, or creates a distraction for the operator that doesn't need to be there. So by automating the movement of the information into the terminal operating system, your operation becomes more safe, more efficient, and much more accurate. The second thing to think about is your competition. So there are 3 fully automated terminals live in North America this year, and there will be more. And in order for everyone else to compete, they need to look at how to automate the manual processes in their terminal, and how to get greater efficiency out of their equipment and out of their workforce. And so I think that's an important message and an important thing to think about. And then the last one is the ROI. So I don't think that there's any customer for which there is not a strong ROI for the solutions that we've talked about today. And so I think the value of sitting down with me or sitting down with Zeke and stepping through, taking a look at your operation, taking a look at the return on investment, there's good value there, and I look forward to the opportunity to work with you. Thank you, and don't forget this webinar is available next week online if you want to come back and take a look at any given part again. Thank you.